Okay, so now queen to d2 by white, and you can see now white is preparing to castle long side, and after that black simply castled, and now comes g4. Okay, now bishop to e6, and now if you are thinking about pushing g5, then simply knight to h5, and now you can see there is a pressure over this knight on d4, and let's suppose if white decides to castle, adding an extra defense, then black can continue by bishop takes d4, bishop takes d4, knight takes d4, queen takes d4, and finally queen to a5, targeting this g5 pawn. And let's suppose if white pushed h4, now comes knight to g3, attacking this rook. And let's suppose after rook to g1, then knight takes f1, rook takes f1, and then rook at a goes to c8, and in the next move rook to c4 is possible, as well as you can see there is a pressure over this a2 pawn, and by this you can see this position is slightly better for black. So that's why after the move, bishop to e6, here white decides to capture this bishop by knight takes e6. And after that, bishop to h6, asking for bishop exchange, but instead of exchanging the bishops, here black can consider pushing the queenside pawns. And with the idea of pushing b4, and let's suppose if white goes for a3, trying to stop this, then simply b4. Black will, however, attack this knight, and if a takes b4, firstly, black will capture this bishop, and after queen takes h6, now comes queen takes b4. And despite of having an equal position, it's not so easy for white to hold this position. I mean, just pause the video and try to find the next move of a white, next move as a white, because it is not so easy for white. I mean, let's suppose if white goes for a move like knight to a2, attacking this queen, which doesn't look bad, and let's suppose if this queen goes to, let's suppose on a5, so that he can target this knight, but simply king to b1. But as you can see, this b and this c file are opened, so black will definitely take the benefit of this by rook to b8. And you can see if this knight reroutes to c1, let's suppose knight to c1, now comes rook to b6, and you can see now black will go for rook to a6, and then queen to a1. Queen to a1 mate is coming. So to stop this, rook to d3, and then rook to a3. And now you can see white, who is attacking previously, now has to be defensive. But in the actual game, after the move bishop to h6, here black made a mistake by capturing this bishop on h6, allowing white to be on this h6 square with the support of this pawn chain and this rook on h1. Okay, so as you can see, since white is threatening the black king, so it's better for black to be defensive on the king side by moving this queen to c5, so that white cannot push this pawn. I mean, let's suppose if queen to c5, and now if white somehow decides to go for g5, then simply knight to h5, completely trapping this queen, and you can see now this is winning for black due to this inactivity of this queen. But in the actual game, after queen takes h6, Here black made an inaccuracy by pushing b5, and that's an inaccuracy because previously, as I said, black has to be defensive on the king side due to these white strong pieces, because now comes h5, attacking this g6 pawn, and here black goes for b4, attacking this knight, so that's why he brings his knight back to b1. But wait, why this is a mistake? This is because this move invites black to play the move which is rook at a goes to c8, threatening mate in 1, and obviously white cannot push this pawn to c3. So due to this, so that's why let's suppose if he goes for rook to d2, and after that g5. But what about queen takes g5 check? Then simply king to f7, and now you can see there is no more attacks left. So what is the correct move instead of the move knight to b1? And guys, let me go back to the move, which is this move. And guys, instead of going back, here the best move for white is to sacrifice this knight on d5. But why? I mean, what will happen if black captures this knight? And one thing is clear, that white cannot capture this knight by this knight, because this knight is guarding the h7 pawn, and if black captures this knight, then white will obviously captures on g6 with as well as threatening mate on h7. So what if black captured this knight by e pawn? And if this happens, then simply h takes g6, and obviously white cannot recapture this pawn due to the threat of queen to h8. So let's suppose if he goes for rook to c8, threatening mate in 1, as well as also targeting this a2 pawn. So that's why here the only best move left for white is king to b1. And let's suppose if queen takes c2, simply king to a1, and now you can see in the next move white is going to push this pawn to g5, which attacks this knight, and then queen takes h7, and by this you can see this position is winning for white. Okay, so in the actual game, after knight to b1, here black goes for king to f7, and after that now comes g5, attacking this knight, and let's suppose if this knight goes back to on g8, targeting this queen. Now comes queen takes h7 check, king to e8, queen takes g6 check, king to d7, and after that h6. And now you can see white has two passers. Okay, so in the actual game, after the move g5, here black goes for rook at f goes to c8, threatening mate in 1. So to stop this, c3 by Yu Yangyi. And guys, believe me, that's not an ordinary move, because there might be a question that's come in our mind, that why only c3? Why not rook to d2 or maybe rook to h2? And guys, this is because let's suppose if white defends this check by rook to d2. Let me go back. Instead of c3, if he goes for rook to d2, that will be a huge mistake, because by this move white will lose all of his advantage. But how? Let's see. First of all, let's suppose if knight takes h5. So firstly, this knight will capture on h5, and if queen takes h7 check, simply knight to g7. And now to continue this, and now I have a question, that how will you continue this attack? And here most of us will go for rook to h6 with the idea of queen takes g6 check, which firstly black will give a check from queen to f1, and if he defends this check by rook. And guys, now I just want you all to pause the video and try to find the move which will draw this game. And guys, if you find the move rook takes c2, then congratulations, you are a genius. And we are doing this because after king takes c2, you can see now this c file is opened, so black will take benefit of this by rook to c8 check, king to c2, king to d2, queen to f2 check, king to d3, queen takes f3 check, king to d2, queen to f2 check, king to d3, queen to f3 check, and now clearly you can see this is a draw. And that's the beauty of this game, because here white sees all of this variation. So that's why After all of this, he decides to go for c3. And now it's better to defend this check by knight to g7, but instead here black goes for king to e8. And as you can see, these pawn chains, you can see this pawn chain is very weak, and here black must consider bringing this rook on c6 so that white cannot attack this pawn structure. But instead he made a mistake by capturing on a2, taking benefit of this pinned knight. And now I just want you all to pause the video and try to find the next crushing move played by white. And in this position here white shocked everyone by sacrificing his rook by rook takes d6 check. And let's suppose if black captured this with the e pawn, now comes queen to f7 check, and obviously this king can't go to d8 due to the threat of rook to h8 mate. So that's why the only move is king to c6. And finally, since this knight is now unpinned, so that's why simply knight takes a2, and you can see this is all over for black. So that's why after rook takes d6, in this position the final move by black is king takes d6, and in this position basically Lu Shangli resigned. This is because, let's suppose if this game continues, then first of all white will give a check by rook to d1, and one thing is clear that this king can't go to e5 due to the threat of queen to h2 mate. So that's why now black is forced to bring this king on c6, which will again unpin this king, and now simply knight takes a2. And yup, that's all. Like this video and I will see you in the next one. This is your host Bison signing off. Bye bye.